if they're not related to the lecture. Alrighty, 7:03. I think that's a good time for us to start. Hi everyone. 13.2. Today we're discussing about ORMs and Prisma. If you don't remember from yesterday we discussed Postgres, the sort of common database that's used in the industry. So there's MongoDB, there is MySQL, and then there is Postgres. We tried to understand the basics of it, how you can write queries, what are the types of queries, and some advanced things like what are joins, how you do them, and indexes I just touched upon, did not cover them too much. So this is where we left the lecture yesterday, which is what are the problems with SQL or just using PG, the library that we were using yesterday, when you're trying to connect to a database. And the answer is you have to write a lot of raw SQL queries. We wrote a bunch of these yesterday. If you don't remember, in yesterday's repository, we had a bunch of sort of mini assignments to do. And here we were writing raw SQL queries. For example, create table users or select star from users. So for this, you need to know SQL. And usually as application developers, as like the backend developer, it's good to know them. It's very hard to keep writing these from scratch. You have to learn a new language called SQL. So it would be nice if someone encapsulates all of this into simple functions, similar to how Mongoose does it. If you've written the database assignments in the past, Mongoose abstracts a bunch of these queries. So you just have to write simple functions. That's the high level idea behind an ORM and how it's different from what we discussed yesterday. Second thing I told here was migrations are hard. What are migrations? It's basically this create table query that we ran. The first time you have to create all the tables and put your schema there. In the future, you might have to update them. For example, maybe add new tables, update the users table to have a database, a username and a first name and a last name. As your application grows, you have to change your database's structure. This is what's called migration. You basically migrate your database from one set of schema to another set of schema. And this is also slightly hard in raw SQL. You have to keep writing scripts like these. You have to run them in your production database, so on and so forth. That's sort of hard. That's the other problem with the databases, like the libraries that we discussed yesterday. Thirdly, you don't get the best types, which means you write this raw SQL query, select star from users, for example. And this users res doesn't have very good types. More specifically, if you go to VS Code and try to write user dot, it won't give you autocomplete on email because it doesn't really know what's the type of this users. It's not very aware of what your users actually look like. So you don't have very good types. These are the three problems with using raw SQL sort of libraries. And that is why ORM, this thing came into the picture, which is like object relational model. Means a bunch of things. The biggest thing it means is it gives you very simple functions in the language of your choice. In our case, that's Node.js, but there are ORMs in Java as well, Golang as well. In our case, it's Node.js, and it gives us very basic functions to run versus writing these raw SQL queries. That's the high level use case of an ORM. This is the official sort of definition from Prisma's official landing page. It says Prisma is a next generation Node.js and TypeScript ORM. Prisma unlocks a new level of developer experience when working with databases. So this part, feel free to ignore. Thanks to its intuitive data model, which means how you describe your data. 2, automated migrations, which is the thing that I discussed, creating and updating your databases schema. 3, type safety, which is the thing that I discussed 2 minutes ago. Okay, when you're doing a get, it would be nice if you get good types on the data that's been returned, and auto completion. This most probably means this. I don't know what this means. This could mean the same thing in type safety. It lets you auto complete, or could mean something else. But the 3 important things to focus on: data model, how you define your data; automated migrations, how you update your database's schema; and 3, type safety. One more thing it gives you is it is a layer in the middle before your database. And so you could have a MongoDB database, you could have a MySQL database, you could have a Postgres database, and Prisma syntax in your Node.js application would be the same. In the backend, it could connect to Mongo, it could connect to SQL, MySQL, it could connect to Postgres. You as the application developer just need to use the high level functions and write them. That's the benefit of this one, which is like Prisma ORM. There are a bunch of other ORMs. In fact, before we go here, there's a very long list of ORMs here. These are the popular ORMs in the market, but Prisma is slowly becoming the market leader. The most sort of popular one before Prisma was Sequelize, but now it's like all sort of tools like these are becoming commercial, and Prisma is sort of going very heavy generally, I've seen. So this blog post also comes from Prisma's official blog, where they compared all the libraries and sort of tried to tell you why Prisma is the best one. And these are the high level metrics to focus on when you're trying to choose an ORM. Again, there are a bunch of ORM libraries out there. What are ORM libraries? Libraries similar to the PG library we used yesterday from here, utils.ts. So yesterday we were using the PG library to connect to the database. The problem was it's not an ORM. You have to write raw SQL queries. So similar libraries that encapsulate a bunch of these things for application developers are called ORMs. These are the popular list of ORMs. This is how you should choose one. This also again comes from the official Prisma blog post, where it says, okay, when you're trying to choose, you choose based on one, popularity, two, the repo activity, which means how many commits are happening, the developer support, if something goes down, something goes bad, you create an issue, and the maturity and stability. You don't need to worry about this, but at a high level on that blog post, they sort of share why Prisma is better than the others. And irrespective of what they say, it is popularly being used everywhere. So it is, yes, slowly becoming the standard popular choice when trying to create an ORM. Alrighty, let's go back a few slides. This was the introduction to Prisma. Let's see what sort of libraries it provides you to be able to achieve all of these things that it says it does. 3 high-level libraries it provides you. First one, the Prisma client. This is basically similar to this PG client, only it's different in the sense that one, you don't have to write raw SQL queries. 2, it is auto-generated and it gives you very type-safe query builders. So you get very good types when you're trying to do a get, trying to do a post. How, we will see, but this is one library that it exposes. Second library is Prisma Migrate. This is the library / tool that takes care of your migrations. If you change your database schema ever, you will see very soon, it sort of creates very nice migration files that you can simply run on your production database. You don't have to manually go into your production database and, write queries like these. For example, the create table query that we wrote yesterday. Whenever you want to add a new table, you add it somewhere in Prisma, and then Prisma takes care of creating these queries, and you run a single command, it applies those to your database. So that's the second library and what it provides you. The third library is Prisma Studio. This is similar to MongoDB Compass, the sort of MongoDB GUI we've been using to visualize how data looks. Prisma has its own sort of offering here, which is called the Prisma Studio. You can also use, so Prisma, as I said, is an ORM, works with a bunch of databases, be it MongoDB, be it MySQL. You can use their native GUIs as well. If you want to, you can use the Prisma Studio as well. We will today be using Prisma Studio. So these are the 3 high-level libraries that they've provided to you, all open source. If you want to contribute to them, you can. Prisma Studio is like a web-based GUI, may be in React, I don't know, I haven't checked. So these are projects that you can contribute to if you want to join Prisma. This might require some extra knowledge, but the Studio is a very GUI friendly application. So good thing to get started on if you want to contribute to Prisma. All right. These are the 3 libraries it provides you. This is what Prisma is. Let's dive deeper into. Okay, this part I think is sort of clear, and it will be more clear later on. Okay, what exactly automated migrations mean? When your database changes, it changes very often. You add more columns, add new tables. Whenever you do that, you have to do this thing called the migration. So basically means you have to migrate your database, change some things there, add a new column, create a new table, so on, and whoopsie daisy. Can you guys still hear me? Chat is open. All right. Sorry about that. Light will be back in a minute. So you have your database keeps changing from time to time. In the pre-ORM days, which means when ORMs did not exist, you had to manually. What would happen is an application developer like me would somehow SSH into the box, the server where the database is running, run a few create table queries like this or update table queries and change the migration. This is how I did things in college. Now, ORMs sort of encapsulate a lot of this, how we will see very soon, but that's one other high level benefit that they provide you. What it means is Okay, it maintains a very nice log of your database, okay, how it changed over time, and you have to run a single command, and any fresh database, any old database of yours, it will apply those migrations on it. What are migrations? Migrations basically mean, okay, it will run a bunch of create queries, update queries, so on and so forth. Just doing a quick check. Can you guys still hear me and see me now? Alrighty, thank you. So this is what migration means. Again, if you don't understand it, we will see this very soon in action, and usually better to understand things by doing. So let's slowly get to that. I have discussed the ORMs that are currently in the market. I have discussed how to choose one. You don't really have to worry about it. You have to choose the one that the project has, really. Unless you create a project of your own, you don't really have a lot of say in what ORM to use. Good ones today are using Prisma. Alrighty. One more example / motivation to learn Prisma. Both cal.com and dub.sh use Prisma. Let's try to, at a very high level, see what their code structure looks like and what the Prisma files look like. The first part of the README of cal.com is completely setting up the database, which means when you open the cal.com repository, if you've been overwhelmed by it in the past, if you go through the README and specifically the setting up part, the local setup, after cloning, what does it say? Go to the project, run yarn, set up your .env file. What this is, I'm sure a few of you know, few of you don't know. It's an environment file where you store all of your secrets. And here, there you go, sorry, manual setup. So this is the automated setup. Don't worry about this. This is the good thing. This is the way to go when you're doing it for the first time. But let's look at the manual setup. And here, the first thing it asks you to do after you clone is configure the .env file and replace a bunch of things. More importantly, replace the database URL. And they also use Postgres. So go to their .env file, replace this database URL. What's the second thing they tell you? Copy and paste the database URL to another file. Okay. Fourth thing, ignore this part. Fourth thing they say is set up the database using the Prisma schema. So this is where sort of DB migrations come into the picture. You run this command to migrate this database of your own to add all of those tables that cal.com needs. So just how I had the create table commands in the repository from yesterday, they don't have a script that has create table commands. You just have to run this one script and it will run all your migrations, which means whatever database URL you put here, you will, when you're testing this locally, use your own database. You won't use the cal.com database. Your initial database will be completely empty, which is why you have to run this command to migrate your database, which means add all their tables, all the schema of the tables to your database. And yeah, it also basically says if you want to look at the data, modify the data, you run this command, which opens up the Prisma Studio, the GUI that I was talking about. This is just one initial sort of motivation / why this is necessary to know. If you go to packages / Prisma, I think this is where all of their code resides. We don't have to worry about this just yet. Similarly, dub.sh also uses Prisma. In fact, if you go to dub.sh, go to their top level Prisma file, there's a schema.prisma. This is something we will be creating as well. After we're done with today's class, try to go through this and see if you understand everything. My hope is you should. Of course, there's a lot of application specific logic here as to what their users look like, and their users sort of have links, projects, so on and so forth. But you should at a high level be able to understand, acha, this is how they have described their schema after we're done with today's class. So I would urge you to go to this file and try to understand their schema. Today, let's try to create something of our own. This was just some primary reason to share why we're learning about Prisma, because most projects are using it. And if you don't know it, you won't understand what are these files. And when you try to go to the code base, maybe update the data, you won't be able to. All right, let's get coding. This was a high level introduction. And let me quickly recap. What we have learned until now is, in the world today, up until a few years ago, you used to create projects like this, which is you had your PG library that would connect to a Postgres database. Firstly, you would run this create table command and create your schemas in the database. Then you would run raw queries in your, let's say, backend to-do application, course selling application, whatever, by running like these raw SQL queries. To change this, solve a bunch of these complexities, ORMs came into the picture. The one that we're discussing today is Prisma. And there are a bunch of others, but the one that we're focused on is Prisma. All right. Before we start, one very big thing to notice, you need full access of Postgres for this to work. What happens is whenever you migrate your data or do this thing called running migrations, which means creating the migration files, creating the files which have the create table commands, all of that jazz, Prisma needs access to your database. It creates some temporary databases there. But if you've been using Elephant SQL for a free Postgres database, what happens is these guys only give you access to one table, one database there. But this guy needs access to the whole thing. If you go here, you will see in the test database, I have access to just this KDM by whatever, this specific database. But Prisma needs access to basically complete access to this. So what Postgres or like Elephant SQL does is it has a single Postgres database there, and it creates smaller sub DBs. It gives me one, gives you one, so on and so forth. That's how they're able to give you this for free. But when you run this locally, if you get a AWS Postgres instance, or even if you get a paid instance here, you will have access to the complete thing. They will start Postgres for you in a very fresh sort of instance. You have access to this DB and other DBs as well. You can create more DBs, delete more DBs, so on and so forth. But on the free account, you have access to just one DB. Prisma needs access to your DB to put the data there. It also needs access to create DBs temporarily and delete them. So if you use this, it won't work, basically is what I'm saying. So you can do one of two things. You can either buy something here, which I wouldn't recommend because I'm not sure even if you buy, do they give you access to the whole thing to run Postgres locally. I'm happy to give you guys 10 minutes to figure out how to run Postgres locally. I am running it locally, which is why I will be able to go through the assignments today. You don't have to run it locally. You can just follow along and understand what's happening. Or if you want to run it locally, then I'm happy to give you guys 10 minutes to try to set it up. If you're able to, great. If not, then that's fine as well. I'm actually do a poll whether or not we should do it. So answer yes if you want to take a 10-minute break and set it up locally. Answer no if I should just continue, and you can do this later on. All right. So 54% said no, which I think is a good thing. We should not waste time here, which means you will proceed. And for those of you who don't have it locally, you can eventually get it locally or get a paid instance, whatever. And then once you do, you'll be able to run all of this locally as well. Today, just try to follow along. Anyways, we have a lot to cover, so it won't make sense to spend 10 minutes setting things up. Alrighty, cool hai bhai log. So this is the repository for today. Let me post this in chat and maybe in Discord as well. This is done, and I'll post this in chat as well. All right. So this doesn't have a bunch of things. Feel free to clone it. You don't have to clone it. We'll do everything from scratch. We'll just copy a few scripts from here. So you don't have to clone it. We will create a fresh project and do everything from scratch. All right. Which means open a terminal, go to your respective folder and create a new folder here, an empty folder. Let's call it week 13 Prisma practice. And then just open it in Visual Studio Code. All right, open a terminal as well. I'm going to give you guys 10 more seconds to do this, which is create an empty folder, open it in Visual Studio Code. Hopefully it's not too difficult. Alrighty, let's go to their official page and see how they ask us to set up Prisma the first time you're trying to do it. So let's go to prisma.io, then go to get started, and it will give you a very nice guide. We are going to follow that guide to create our thing today. Alrighty. First thing it says, create the empty project, go into it. We've already done it. We've opened it in Visual Studio Code as well. Second thing it says is initialize the package.json and add TypeScript ts node at type/node. If you have TypeScript installed globally, you don't need this. You don't need ts node as well. At types node also you don't need. But since we're following their tutorial, let's follow what they're telling us to do. You don't need a bunch of these because in the past we have installed this globally. We will not be using ts node, so ts node for sure you don't need. But there's no downside to extra dependencies, so let's install them. All right, copy this, go to Visual Studio Code, paste this. What will the first command do? It will create a package.json. What will the second command do? It will bring all the dependencies here, also add all of these dependencies to, again, dev dependencies, because if you look at the command, it says npm install this --save -dev. What does this mean? This means you only need these during development, not during production, because TypeScript and ts node aren't really used in your code base, the final distributed code base, which is why you put things here. Even if you have it in dependencies, it is fine. There's a very nuanced difference between the two. All right, going back, it tells you to initialize the TypeScript config. We've done this many times now. So tsc-init or npx tsc-init both work. I now have a empty ts config file. The next command is new. The next command is something you need to sort of, please don't copy paste this quickly because we have to make a few changes here. This is the one that initializes Prisma into your project and adds the very basic config file that we will build upon. Let's copy this, but the database that they've written here is SQLite. We are not using SQLite. What are we using? Postgres. So you can paste it as such, but make sure you replace SQLite with PostgreSQL. And as you can see, it gave you a few things. Prisma has been initialized. It created a file here, prisma/schema.prisma. We will see what that is, but this is the same file we saw on dub.sh as well. And give you a few more things. This is the one that we will be needing, and this is a step we need to follow. We have initialized schema.prisma. If I go here, you will see a bunch of things. It says provider Prisma client JS, provider PostgreSQL for the data source, and URL is env of database URL. This means this is an environment variable and should come from a top level .env file. You can paste your Postgres URL here directly, but that's usually not recommended because this file is committed to GitHub and you don't want your secret committed to GitHub. This is also the reason why if you go to dub.sh's GitHub, here as well in the top level Prisma/schema.prisma, if you look at the provider database, URL comes from an environment variable. They don't have it hard coded here because you don't want your SQL username and password to be present on a GitHub repo for the people to look, like for the world to look at. All right. What does this mean? It means pick it up from the environment file. What is the environment file? As you can see, it says here, set up database URL in a .env file. So it might have also created a .env file for you here. Remove all the comments and replace this Postgres URL with your own. In my case, the username and password is exchange, and database name could be anything because I have access to the whole thing. I'm going to name it either to-do app or posts app because this is the sort of app that we're creating today. This is what my database URL looks like. Yours would be different. If you paste the Elephant SQL database here, it will not work. You have to either run it locally or you need to buy a Postgres DB which has access, in which you have access to the whole thing based on this and not just a specific database. All right. Just to confirm this is the right URL, I'm going to run the psql command on localhost on port 5432 using the username exchange, connect to the database posts, and it asks me, oh, that does not exist. Let's just use the database exchange as what can we call it? Let's use it. Okay, so DB does exist. Even if it doesn't exist for you, it is fine. Once we do the migration, you will eventually see it. I'm going to use DB as the database here because it has already been created for me. If it hasn't been created for you, it is fine. It will be created when we run the migration for the first time. All right. So this is what my database URL looks like. Yours would be your username, yours password. Whenever you sort of set up Postgres locally, You'll create the default username and password, and then the database name could be anything for now. If you try to connect to it using PSQL, it won't let you because this database does not exist. But once we run the migrations, it will. All right, let's go to schema.prisma and let's see what all we need to add from here. Right now, this tells you how you create your Prisma clients, like when you, what all you want to do from this high level Prisma file. And this tells you your data source, which means, is it a Postgres database where you want to finally store your data? Is it a Mongo database? So on and so forth. And that's like all we have set up until now. Just a basic prisma.config file using this command right here. The benefit of Prisma is you can just choose any database you want, and at the high level, your APIs will remain the same, which means how you call put data will remain the same. And internally, it will connect to a SQL database, connect to a Mongo database, send the right set of queries there. That's what this guy's job is. All right. Second point, models. This is the most important bit, most confusing bit. If you understand this, everything from here is straightforward. Model your data in the Prisma schema. So a few weeks ago, we understood this thing called Open API spec. Over there, you would get a single file, a final file, which has all your routes, all your shape of your backend, the input that it expects, the output that you get. Such a single file is like super useful to do many things. You can create clients in Node.js for that specific API. You can create a docs page for that specific API, so on and so forth. We've discussed this a little bit in the Open API class. This is very similar. A single file, a single source of truth where you have all of your schemas. What is the schema? Basically what your database should finally look like. Again, if you're using SQL, your schema needs to be very strict and very well defined. This is what my schema looks like. Only once you've defined your schema can you actually connect to a database and put data there. It is for the same reason. Yesterday, when we were doing raw SQL queries, we first ran the create table command and sort of created all the data there. But in case of Prisma, rather than running this create table command, it says just tell me your schema up front in this format, and then I will take care of giving you the migration file, which will look something like this, and we can run it. But you as the application developer just describe your schema here. All right. Hopefully this is straightforward. Let's try to understand what their schema looks like. What we need to understand is basically these four constructs. If you know these four constructs, you're good for a really long time. After a point, we will need to understand some more sort of annotations, but these are good enough for a basic to-do application, even a course selling application. All right. So what they have described is a Facebook-like application where there are a bunch of users and each user can create multiple posts. What should the user schema look like? In their case, they've said an ID, which is the user ID, email, name, and posts. There should ideally be a password here. Ignore posts for now as well. ID, email, password, and name is like a good thing you want to store in the database. This is very different from how we have defined schema until now, which was like something like this, which was create table, ID, serial, primary key. Here we had to know the actual SQL syntax. Here they say write it in this specific syntax that Prisma understands, and we will take care of converting it into SQL or Mongo or whatever database you want. You give me the syntax in this specific format. So what do we say? We say, okay, create a users table, ID, which is an integer, auto increment, which means starts from 1, keep going up, similar to the serial key here, serial primary key. And it is an ID, which means it's the primary key of this specific table. Email for the user, name for the user. String means it is a string and it is required. String question mark means it is not required, it can be null, which means finally this will be converted into something like this. Email, text or varchar 15, unique, not null. Why? Because here I say, okay, it is unique and it is a string, doesn't have a question mark here, which means it is not null. It needs to have some value. Name, however, is optional. So if you convert it into SQL, it will be name and like varchar and can be empty, which means there won't be a not null clause there. It is also not unique. Two people can have the same name. All right. Is this users part fairly straightforward? Maybe minus the posts. Don't worry about posts. But does this syntax seem clear? Prisma. This is how Prisma understands database schemas, and this is how you have to define them when you're trying to create your application. At least the first part, is it clear? All right, 91% is great. Now comes how you can relate data together. We've done this yesterday as well. Yesterday we said कि हाँ भाई posts have a foreign key to the users table. What are foreign keys we discussed yesterday? कि posts are related, to-dos are related to users, and this is how we said कि भैया in the to-dos table, user ID is an integer which references the users table, which means this is a foreign key to the users table. Every to-do will have a user here, and only you can't really create a to-do without a user being present here. You can't really delete a user who already has a to-do present in the to-dos database. This is how you relate data and make your schema very strict. कि हाँ भाई, you can't really, your database never becomes corrupt. You can never have a lingering user, a lingering to-do which doesn't have a corresponding user, and you can't, that's the only thing, right? You can't have a lingering user which doesn't have a to-do which doesn't have a corresponding user. If you try to create a to-do which doesn't have which has a user ID which does not yet exist, it will complain. If you try to delete a user who has a bunch of to-dos, it will complain as well. That's what this references things does here. How do you do this in Prisma? You say post has an ID, again integer, auto increment, and by default it's auto increment, and this is the primary key. It has a title which is required, cannot be null. Content which is not required, so it can be null. None of these, this is unique. Published, which is similar to our done variable in to-dos, whether or not this post was published by the user. Boolean, and it defaults to false. Now comes these three fields, these two fields here, and this one field here. This is how data gets related in Prisma. Okay, bhai, there is an author who is a user. Where does this user come from? Here. Okay, every post has an author who is a user, and what field do the relations combine on? The author ID here will be the ID of the user here. Okay, this might feel a little boggling, so I will repeat. You need to connect these two databases. Basically, every post needs to have an author who is a person here. Again, we are not storing author as such in the database. In the database, only the author ID will be stored. Prisma will take care of understanding, but you need to tell Prisma कि हाँ, author ID is an integer, but it connects to user how through this sort of a relationship. Okay, the author ID connects to is of type user, which means in the users table there will be an entry for the author, and this is how they have been related. Okay, the author ID field here references the ID in the users table. This one line is similar to this one line here. Okay, user ID, who's an integer, references ID here in users. Similarly, author ID references ID here. This is how you define relationships in Prisma. And Prisma is very strict. If you have defined a relationship, you have to tell it that author ID is here, author is here. And since every post has an author, every user also has an array of posts. If you don't write this line, it will complain. It will tell you are missing a relationship. So whenever you define relationships, they need to be very strictly defined in both the tables. The user, since every post has a user associated, every user will have a post of arrays. Now the array could be empty if the user has no to-dos or no posts, but you have to mention this explicitly. The user has a bunch of posts. Post belongs to a single author, and this is how things are related. Again, to repeat, author is never as such stored in the post database. It's a high level sort of abstraction. Every post has an author. Neither are all the posts of the user stored in the sort of MySQL database or Postgres database. They are related through the things we did yesterday, which means there are simply rows in two tables, but they're related on a conceptual level. So later on, you can do very nice queries when you sort of use the ORM. Is this basic schema clear? What does this ID default auto increment mean? What does @unique mean? And more specifically, the relationship, which is the most sort of difficult part here and important part. Here, I'm happy to spend more time if still 85% don't understand this. Okay, good. No worries. So 67%. Let's pause right here and let's open chat and answer a few questions. Iske baad, it's very simple. Just writing a few functions. Function calls. What's the question? Repeat. All right. Repeat. Quick recap. Okay. So let's repeat the whole thing. What is Prisma? It is a replacement for, at a high level, what you have to understand right now, it's a replacement for the PG library. The PG library lets you connect to the Postgres database. Similarly, there is a Prisma library that lets you connect to the Postgres database and put data there. The Prisma library is very highly opinionated. It says, bro, I'm going to give you a few things, which is like good types. I'm going to give you automatic migrations. I can only give you all of that if you tell me very well what your schema is in a language that I understand. Please just tell me once in a single file, okay, what does your schema of the database look like? With just this single file, I will generate everything for you. I will generate migration files. I will generate automated clients. But you as the application developer have to do just one thing for me. Okay, define your schema very well. What is the schema? Schema is how does your database look like? In MongoDB, what does our database look like? If I go back a few slides from yesterday, this is what a MongoDB database looks like. So if you have to define the schema of a MongoDB database, you'll say, okay, there's a username that's a string, password that's a string, purchases goes it's an array, so on and so forth. In SQL, this is slightly different. You don't really put arrays or objects in SQL. So it looks something like this. First name, which is string, last name, which is string, password, which is string, and maybe an address table where user ID is an integer, address is a string, so on and so forth. This is what's called the schema of your database. This is your job as the application developer to write the best schema out there. You can write ugly schemas. You could, as we discussed yesterday, combine users and address table if you want to, but you shouldn't do it. You should what's called normalize your database very well, which is like a very theoretical concept that's taught in DBMS. Very good concept to know as well for advanced people. Okay, what is normalization of database? It basically means breaking your database down into sub databases and making sure they are related well together. Yesterday, go back to the slide here. Yesterday, we sort of understood this thing called joins, which means if there are two different databases, which will usually be the case in Postgres, if you have, let's say, a to-dos table and a users table, each to-do will have a user ID field. This to-do belongs to this user. So the first to-do here, for example, belongs to the first user. Second to-do also belongs to the first user. The third to-do belongs to the user with ID 3, which means this user right here. This is always strictly true. Okay, every to-do needs to have an owner. And if you look at it, the opposite is also true, right? Every owner or every user has an array of to-dos. Now the array might be empty, but they do have an array of to-dos. You can see that. And every to-do has a sort of owner or like parent. This is like a one to many relationship. A user has many to-dos, but a to-do only has one owner, right? Question is, how do you describe this in your schema? In case of Postgres, the way to do this is this. When you're creating a table, the users table doesn't have any references, any foreign keys, any simple ID, email, password. This is how you describe schema in SQL for a users table. But for a table that has relationships, this is how you describe schema. ID, title, description, the things that this guy has. And this guy is related to the users table. How is it related? The user ID field here is a user in this table and it's connected via the ID over there. The ID of the users table is the user ID here. If you look at it, the user ID here is the ID of a user here. This is how every row in this table is connected to a user here. This is not what is joins, but this is how relationships are created in SQL, and you need to create these relationships as your database grows bigger and there are multiple places which are somehow connected with each other. This is the way to do it in SQL. Now the thing that we are using is Prisma. Prisma is like, bro, people can use SQL, people can use MongoDB as well in Prisma. So don't give me your syntax in SQL. Then I'll have to convert to SQL to MongoDB. You give me syntax in the way I understand, which is this. Just a single file, put all your schema there. Users table is simply very straightforward. If you remove this, it's just ID, email, and name. Post is also straightforward until this point. Where it gets tricky is this part and this part. This part says post has an author. What it actually has is just the author ID field. Post has an author ID field, which is an integer. Similar to to-dos had a user ID field, which was an integer. What's actually a little extra here is this thing and this thing. Okay, you explicitly say every user has an array of posts. Again, could be empty. And every post has an author. And how are they connected? You represent it here. Okay, author is a user, which is the relation between the author ID for this table and the user ID for this table, or like the ID for this table defined here by the relationship. So author ID from here and ID from the users table. That's how you almost similarly create this line in your final SQL schema, if you will. And we will see eventually that this actually happens when these files get auto-generated by Prisma. But this is how you have to define it in the long file. Dub.sh similarly has a very long file. They also have a users table. Their user has ID, name, email verified, image, so on and so forth. As your application goes big, it'll as well. And here, as you can see, links pe focus karte. Let's focus on links. What is dub.sh? It lets you create a bunch of URL shorteners, or like URL links. So here it says link is link of array. If I go to link, I will see a relationship. Link at relation. As you can see, link has a relation to user on what field? User ID, references ID. So user ID here, this user ID is connected to the links table ka ID. Now is it clear? Okay, this is how things are done. This is how data is related in SQL databases, or like, sorry, Prisma, not SQL databases. Is this part clear now? Alrighty, very good. Very good, very good, very good. So let's do 10 more minutes of coding and then we'll take a break. Alrighty. Let's go to Visual Studio Code. You should as well. Let's look at what are the next steps it says. It says create these things. So copy this and paste this in your schema.prisma file. Even if you don't have the database right now, it's fine because you can at least follow along. It won't run for you, but try to create this code by yourself. So at least you learn some little. All right. Save this. These are the things that were there by default. This env variable I've added in the .env file, and this is my users model and then the posts model. Save. And let's look at what's the next thing it tells us. Run a migration to create your database tables with Prisma Migrate. So now we are using the second library that I was talking about. Okay, Prisma has a few libraries that they expose. Prisma Client, Prisma Migrate, and Prisma Studio. This is where Prisma Migrate comes into the picture. You told it, this is what my schema looks like. Please create the underlying create table queries for me. That is what Prisma is supposed to do. And how does it do it? By this command. Prisma migrate dev and a name for the migration. In the future, you will change this. You will create this, run this once. It will create some migration files for you. In the future, you might add more tables. When you do, you just have to run this command again and give it the specific name. For example, let's say in the future, you add a to-dos table here. You can run the command npx prisma migrate dev -- name added to-dos table. That way you have a very nice log of what all changes were made as your application grew. All right, let's copy this. Let's try to run it. npx prisma migrate dev -- name init in the root folder. Enter. Now this is where it will fail for a few people for whom the Postgres URL is not correct. If you use the elephant wala websites says Postgres URL, it will fail, and that's fine because you can run this locally. You need access to the whole database, which means you'll either have to run this locally or get like a more beefier, not beefier, but like a database that gives you access to everything. The reason for this is, so I was trying it with the elephant SQL yesterday, and the reason for this is there is something called, you can read about it here. Just read about the error that you see, and it will tell you कि whenever Prisma is creating these migrations, it creates like a hidden table. So it needs access to create a temporary table in your database, which it does not have for those elephant databases. It does have for my local database because it has all access for it. So if it does not work for you, it's fine. When you install Postgres locally, or if you deploy a Postgres instance actually in production that has complete access, that you have complete access to, it will work. All right. We ran this command. What does it say? It says generated Prisma client, and it also applying migration. This maybe also should have said something. It created this migration, but it says it created this file. It created a file and also generated Prisma client. So it did two things. Let's first focus on this. What has it created? In the Prisma folder, a new folder has been created called migrations. This is a very common pattern you will see everywhere. Okay. As your database grows, these migration files are created. What does that mean? Let's look at it. Migration.sql. Does this feel familiar? create table user. Isn't this similar to the queries that we were writing by hand yesterday? Create table users. But now who has written that? This load has been put to Prisma. Okay, bhai, I just gave it a top level file. It converted it to this create table queries. All these complicated relationships that we were writing yesterday, I don't have to write them anymore. So again, the syntax is a little different. So for example, we did primary key here yesterday. These guys defined a constraint later on. Okay, the ID is the primary key. Syntax might be a little different. Underneath, it's doing the same thing. Okay, ID is the primary key for the first table, and this ID is the primary key of the second table. And in the end, it is, so two things it does. It creates an index for your email, which don't worry about what it is. And the thing that I was supposed to discuss today in the beginning, but I did not, because let's do Prisma first, and then most probably I will cover in the offline video. Most probably it's a very simple thing, so you understand it already. Added foreign key. So this is the important bit. Here it did not do author ID, whatever references users of ID. They did it a different way. Okay, author ID they just wrote as such, and then in the end they added a foreign key. Okay, alter table posts. Add a constraint, the name of the constraint, foreign key author ID references users ka ID. All right, and then something extra here which you should Google and understand. Restrict on update cascade. What does this mean? This basically you represent what should happen when something is deleted from the database. If you delete a user, should your users, the to-dos for that user also be deleted, or should you error out things like these? But let's not get into the SQL query at all. Eventually these become very big. You don't ever look at them. You only have to look at this file. Okay, whether or not you have described the schema correctly. If you have described the schema correctly, you will be fine. And these SQL files are auto-generated. You don't ever have to look at auto-generated files, but we are right now because let's see what it's doing under the hood. Again, if we do this for a MongoDB URL, it will create different types of migrations, or may not create any migrations, because MongoDB is a schema-less server. So maybe there's a way to define schema there, and maybe it does create some SQL, some migrations like these, not SQL migrations, but like something to put in MongoDB. If it does allow some sort of a schema, I'm not sure if it does. But if you use MySQL, then also it will create like an SQL file that looks something like this. Syntax might be slightly different. But the high level thing is, you as the application developer wrote this. Now you can choose your MongoDB, your database of your choice. If you ever want to move from MongoDB to Postgres, you can. All you have to do is change the database URL and change the provider here. Prisma will take care of converting your data to that specific shape. So that's the high level idea of why sort of Prisma is good. Okay, you worry about this file, it worries about converting it into Mongo, SQL, so on and so forth. Can you guys see migration.sql locally? For the people who does work, is this part clear how migrations are created? If this part is clear, then after this, it's a smooth ride. Let's see, and like what migrations are we good until this point? All right. 90%, which is great. So let's take a quick break until 8 p.m. and then we will start writing actual queries. I will open chat for the next 5 minutes, and then I'll also take a 5-minute break for the 10%, or generally anything that's not clear, anything that I should repeat. All right. Show.env file. There you go, sir. The .env file looks something like this. It basically has a database URL, which is this thing right here. This is the same key, like the string that is being used here. If I make this something else, database URI, I have to make the same change here as well. Sir, can we get PostgreSDB for free? Oh, you can get PostgreSDB from Supabase for free. That's great. But do you have access to the whole thing is the question. If you can, that's great. In fact, we have some time. Let's see. Supabase. It would be nice if you guys can test this along with me. $0. Let's see. Sir, can we get PostgreSDB from Supabase for free? Try it. If it works, great. Neon.tech gives you full access. So that's great. If you want to, let's see, someone already did this. So neon.tech gives you full access. So let's try to create a database here. Time to stop sharing because I have a few emails. Let me just sign up. You guys should as well. All right. All right, let's see. Neon.tech. If I go here and if I create a new project, let's call it test, close. Let's try to copy. Where is the Postgres URL? Read more. No, sorry. There you go. So let's copy this. Let's try to replace the Postgres URL with my neon.tech URL. Let's try to delete the migrations. Prisma/migrations. And then let's maybe run migrate again. I don't think this is working. It usually doesn't take this long. When it takes this long, it usually means it's not working, but let's see. Until then, let me open chat. What is author in the post table if not a column? Oh, it is nothing in the post table. It's a high level concept. So later, what does a high level concept mean? It means that you tell ke bhai, whenever people are doing queries in the future, right? So you let them do like whatever db.user.query or whatever get author or something like that. So when that's the field that you eventually query on, when you're getting the full object in Node.js, it's never stored as such in what do you call it? Oh, it did work. Thank you, whoever suggested this. So what was I saying? Yeah, the author field is a concept. It's never stored in the database. It's not present in migrations.sql, like this file right here. But we will see where it is used very soon. It is used in the final when we're writing queries. That's where it will be used. All right. So anyone who was not able to run this locally, you can get a database on neon.tech. It's slightly slow, but it does work. So if you get a database here, which I just did, you'll be able to follow along the class. All right. Let me relationship by creating an extra column. Is Prisma we are by adding in Prisma we are establishing relationship by adding one extra column. I wouldn't call it an extra column. It is like the author ID column, which was present yesterday as well. You need one column to relate both of them, and that's the author ID column for us. If that was your question, maybe I did not understand your question. Is it necessary to provide posts of in the users table? I think in case of I do agree. You should have a reference of A, but I think if I remove this, so let's try to remove it. So I'm just going to run this locally, so because it's faster, but you can use the database there. And let me go to migrations.sql and let me remove this. Sorry, not migrations.sql. Let me delete migrations.sql. Let me change the database name to something else, db2. And in prisma.sql, let me remove this posts. I think it will complain. I could be wrong. And as you can see, it complains. It says error validating the author field in model post. The relation author on model post is missing in the opposite relation field. So Prisma deliberately makes you have to describe the relationship on both the sides here, else it will give you an error. The reason for this is like the benefit for this is whatever you write here is how the final client is auto generated. I keep saying client here. The client basically is like the library that is generated for you, which sort of you use to run get queries, post queries. So that's why you need to explicitly tell this is related to this and this is related to this. How? Via the posts key, via the author key. This and this is never stored in the database, but it's a conceptual thing that you need when you're creating the final client. We will see this very soon. Good question. All right, I'm going to be back in 3 minutes. mute myself. Any more questions? Oh, sorry, there were some questions. Let's see. If I remove post line from this model, will it throw an error? So it does. Yeah, that's what I showed. Quick recap. So final recap before we proceed. Step 1 is please go to neon.tech and get yourself a database for free. It will sort of let you, you'll be able to run all of this locally. So that will be cool. Step 2, two things we have learned, a quick recap. Most important thing we've learned is this file. This is the only place you have to describe your schema, and everything else is just happens automatically thanks to Prisma. So the only thing you need to know from this class is maybe two things. One, Prisma is an ORM. It is very similar to the PG library we were discussing yesterday. Two, it makes your life very easy in two parts. One, it gives you automatic migrations, which is it generates these files for you as your database schema changes. Let me run this back again. So as you can see, it created the new DB2 database for me. It created the migration as well. So it automatically generates these migration files. As I change my schema, if I go here, add a new table, it will add a new script here. And then whenever I put this on my production database, it will run all of these scripts there. So that's the benefit of using something like Prisma. You don't have to manually create tables. You just have to manually create this one file. Second benefit is the thing we'll see very soon, automatic client generation, which is what we'll be getting to next. These are the two things that Prisma gives you and most ORMs sort of try to give you and make your life as the application developer very easy, so that you just have to worry about this one file and everything else is sorted by Prisma. Cool. Cool hai bhai. So let's proceed. Do you guys need some time to set this up locally, the Neon Tech database, or are we good to go? Shall I proceed? Yes or no? Shall I proceed? Right. Okay. Maybe give 5 more minutes to set things up. So people who were on a break or whatever, you can go to neon.tech and get yourself a database, and that database does work. You have full access. So you can, if you add that to your .env file here, you're good to go. I'm going to wait for 5 minutes for people to do it. I'm opening chat if someone has any questions related to the class. If you want to run ahead, just go to 100xdevs/week 13 Prisma. And here I've created a bunch of scripts that will now try to run locally, and there's numbered from top to bottom. For example, how do you create a user? How do you create a post? So on and so forth. So feel free to just go here and start to experiment with it. I'm going to wait 5 more minutes so people can get a neon.tech server and then set things up locally. So for the people who are doing it now, get the database URL here, go to Prisma, this getting started guide, and start from the top. Create an empty project, initialize TypeScript, all that jazz. Add Prisma. Make sure you run this command with PostgreSQL here, and then add this to your database file, and then run the migrate command. Okay. 4 more minutes we will wait for. Chat is open. Okay. So Superbase is quite fast than Neon Tech. Okay. So Superbase also works. That's another sort of service you can use. Neon Tech also works. Either are fine. Why Prisma is created? Good question. Someone asked a very good question. They said, if I look at my databases right now, it has 3 databases. Posts we created, users we created. What is this database? And the answer is, this database is what Prisma looks for when you tell it. So eventually you will have multiple databases. You will have a dev database, a production database, a local database, and whenever you add a new feature, you will first make the change here in the Prisma file. Let's say you add a username field here, or like first name, last name field here. You add a last name field here. Then you run migrate. Then you get this specific new migration file, and then you put it in your local database. But eventually it needs to be put in the production database. This, if you look at it, it basically has a track of what all migrations have been run on this database, which is there's just been one migration until now. So whenever Prisma is trying to bring the database up to date, it knows what other migrations to apply. So that's, I'm assuming, why they created this database. I could totally be wrong, but looking at the name and like what the contents of the thing is, I feel Prisma uses this. It knows these are the migrations we need to apply. Right now we only have one file. As our schema changes, we will have multiple files here. Like we'll have one folder and then another folder and another folder. Each one of these folders will have like create tables, update tables, things like these. And this table has a track of, okay, what all migrations have been run, what all migrations need to be run, things like these. Why don't we write posts array? We have written that, right? There you go. Oh, posts array, because post is the name of this model. It's not posts. So whatever is the name here, you use here. Does Prisma work with MongoDB as well? It does indeed. If you replace this with MongoDB, or when you're generating initially, when I wrote this command npx prisma init, if you add the data source provider to be MongoDB, it will just work. It will connect to your MongoDB database and start to store data there. Prisma extension, it not looking good. So apparently there's an extension we can install. Okay, we have a minute. I would urge you to do the same. There is a Prisma extension. 1 million plus installs, looks decent. After I install it, I'm assuming this file will look a little pretty. Really advanced question. Do you know how this works? If there's a new language, see, beautiful, very nice colors we get. But do you know how these colors are generated for a certain language? For example, how does JavaScript has these nice colors? Prisma, whoever was the developer of this extension, what exactly did they do for these colors to appear? So, computer architecture ka question. But okay, let's proceed. We're at 8:05. Until now, what have we done? I'm here in the migration guide of Prisma, which is initialize the project, initialized Prisma, initialized the data source provider for us, which is Postgres, and then ran the migration to create the migration file, and also migrated my local database. If I look at my local database right now, it has two folders. Yours should as well, posts and user. Ignore the third one for now, although we already discussed what it does. Step 4 is now writing actual queries. So let's get right into it. Let's create a source folder here. Let's create a source folder. src, and create a new file here called create user.ts. All right. We created a new file, create user.ts. Two more things please do for me, just so that our package looks a little clean. Go to tsconfig.json. In root dir, uncomment this and make it ./src. I repeat, root dir, make ./src, and out dir, make ./dist. All right, out dir ./dist, root dir ./src. So our thing looks a little cleaner after we build. In create-user, let's see what it asks us to do. It asks us to do something, but rather than looking at this, what they ask us to do, it's basically the same thing. This is how, okay, this is a high level of how they tell you to use Prisma. You don't have to follow this pattern. You can just use this Prisma client, do other things, but let's try to copy and see what they say. Let's copy this whole thing, paste it here. It says import Prisma client from @prisma.client/client. So this is sort of the auto-generated client that when you ran the migrate command, it gave you two things. One, I've run the migrations. Two, it said I've generated a client. So this client is actually different based on what your schema looks like. If the schema has another table called to-dos, this client will also have like some to-do information here. We will see very soon. But that's auto-generated client is something I wanted to tell. Some code of this is already present. Oopsie daisy. Already present in the node module. Some gets overridden when you run the dev migrate command. When you run this command, it overrides some code in node modules. And that's how this Prisma client now has some user code, some posts code there. Here it says, okay, create an async function called main. Call main, and then this is the standard promise syntax. Then do a prisma.disconnect, which means disconnect from the database, else you'll have a lingering open connection. Even if there is a catch, which means there was an error here for whatever code you're running, do a prisma.disconnect and just log the error. If this feels overwhelming, remove all of this. Don't worry about it. Just call the main function, basically remove all of this. And here is where we will write all of our queries. Ideally, do this. Main is an async function. Main.then, which means once main succeeds correctly, if the code here does not throw anything, then disconnect from Prisma. If this feels weird, feel free to remove this as well for now, although I would urge you to keep this line. This is what sort of disconnects, else there'll be like a lingering connection to the database, which is not great. It's actually not lingering, it's launching. Never mind. Moving on. Dot then disconnect, dot catch, disconnect, and if there is an error, log here. Maybe add a log here. Done with the query. All right. Is this part clear? Is this async part? Does it feel weird? Oh, this feels weird. All right. Okay. Is this part clear? Remove this. I'm doing literally nothing. I've defined an async function. I call the async function. I do a console.log hi here. And I've imported the Prisma client, not done anything with it. This part though is simple. And if it is, this is how we will proceed. It's fine. Don't worry about the tries and the catches. All right. अभी इसमें क्या प्रॉब्लम है यार? This तो is straightforward. All right. Cool. So let's do this. Let's not worry about the dot thens and dot catches. But if you're one of the advanced people already understand this, feel free to keep the code like this. All right. Here is where we will run all of our create, delete, all those commands. So let's see what those look like. What do we want? Let's say we want to create a user. Oh, is there a lag? No mind. The way to do that is Prisma dot. As you can see, it gives me an auto-generated, like completed key here called user, which means, this is what I was saying, this Prisma client already knows your schema somehow. This schema.prisma somehow reached this library that you have in your node modules. How? You don't have to worry about. But when you ran this migrate command, some code got overridden in this Prisma client library, which is why after you initialize it and you do a Prisma dot it gives you like an autocomplete user. That's how you can sort of just keep playing with the queries now. So let's do a await prisma.user.create. And this is where I need to know the syntax a little bit, which I think looks something like this. There you go. Prisma.user.create. What are we trying to do? Put an entry in the users table. How do we do it? Prisma.user.create. And what is the data that should go in? Again, it gives me auto completion here, which means it already knows that users table has an email key, a name key, and whatever post. But like email and name is what we're worried about right now. That is why it gives you email. Then I can put some random email here. If you really want to get deeper and explore the types, you can actually hover over this data and press enter. Oh, maybe not. Okay, let's go here. Prisma.user.create. Hover over this. Go into it, and as you can see, it says user create args here. Even though, where does this exist? This exists in node modules. If I hover over it, node modules /.prisma /client /index.js, so on and so forth. So even though Prisma library comes, all of us get the same Prisma library locally, some extra things get created when you run the migration for your specific use case. In our case, we have a users and a post model, and Prisma creates very nice types for you, which is why you can simply do prisma.user and it already has a type there to tell you there is a create function, there is a create many functions, so on and so forth. This is significantly different from what we were doing until now, which is whatever pg.query and then sending a raw query in there. Insert into users values, whatever. This is hard to write as an application developer. This is much easier, and thanks to Prisma, it also gives you very nice types. So all you have to do is .cr create. And if I press comma here and add whatever n, it tells me that name is an optional field. I can actually send name here. All right. This much is good enough for you to be able to put data in the database. If I run step 1 tsc-b to convert this into JavaScript, if you see now a dist folder is created which has a create-user.js file. So please run tsc-b locally so that your dist folder gets created with create-user.js. If you don't see this, you might not have added source dir and out dir in tsconfig. And so please change that. If things are fine, if this code you have written fine, and if you are not able to write this well, you can go to the repository where I've written all of this, the week 13 Prisma repository, and there is a create-user.ts file here. You can just look at it again. Feel free to comment this part out if it feels jarring for now. Just call the main function, and then inside the main function, do your thing, which is, in our case, just create the user. This is the syntax to do it. You might ask, why is it this? Why is it not Prisma.create.user. That's how just they wrote it. Okay, Prisma dot the table that you're trying to do an operation on, dot the operation that you're trying to do, which is create, and the data that you want to send, which is email and password. Let's try to run dist/createuser.js. Takes a while and then hopefully finally runs. Let's go to question is, how do I know if it is already, the data has already been put there? I can either run PSQL, but this is a little weird. Users, and so I can either, oh, see daisy, never mind. Let's not run PSQL and let's simply run npx space Prisma space studio. I repeat, we have run this. Ideally, there should be an entry in our users database, but how do we visualize this? It was good in MongoDB that you had this thing called Compass that would let you visualize the data. Prisma gives you something similar, the thing that I was talking about initially. Okay, Prisma gives you three things: the automatically generated client, which is this thing; the migrations, which is this thing; and third thing it gives you is the Prisma Studio, which just lets you visualize data very well. So if I run npx Prisma Studio, it opens up a website which looks something like this, and it lets me explore all my models. I have a post model which has 0 entries, a user model which has 1 entry, which means our code did work as expected. harkirat@gmail.com is here. Name Harkirat Singh is here. Is this part clear? Is creating a user part clear? Are you able to understand this specific file and then understand npx Prisma Studio and how it lets you visualize, like just having a MongoDB Compass alternate inside your browser? The create user query clear? Is that simple, straightforward, or should we dive deeper into this? All right, pretty good. So 84%, which means I'll take a small pause, just a small pause, nothing too big. Where are you stuck again? The 14%, which part feels a little weird? Any questions? User has not been created. Why other use Docker server with Prisma? All right. Basically, a bunch of you see a few errors. All right. When I do the select query, the join, make a relationship. Okay, that seems like not a question for right now. See, so I see a few errors. For the person seeing the log, so Dhruv, maybe try this. For Dhruv, the answer might be just go to package.json and remove TypeScript TS node from here. And maybe even type stuff. So remove this and remove this. Remove node modules, do a fresh install, and then it might work. Explain indexes and unique. Okay. A data source block is missing on Prisma schema. Oh, so for that person for whom it says the data source block is missing from the Prisma schema, please go here, make sure you have this. Most probably when you are copying this and this, you overrode the file. You still need to have these two things along with this. Some Docker question which I did not understand. While migrate final SQL schema author got disappear. Is there any rule for relationship keyword? So yeah, one thing that also might feels like people are not getting right now is this Prisma.schema. If I've written posts here and author here, it doesn't mean it will be part of your SQL schema. It does not mean it will be part of your databases. This is a high level concept that the client needs, which is like this automatic generated client right here, this guy right here. This guy needs to know what is the key things like authors, thing like post, so that you can do basically something like this. Posts, this thing, the auto generated key here comes from this post here, but this will not be part of your SQL schema. If I go to whatever PSQL, or maybe not PSQL, if I go here, it does show you posts array here, but it's not part of the actual underlying SQL schema. If I go to SQL, PSQL, and then let's see what tables we have. Select star from user. As you can see, it only has ID, email, and name. ID, email, and name. It does not have posts. This concept is just for Prisma to generate this client, the Prisma client. So users can, when they're creating a user, maybe they can also create an array of posts for them upfront. You don't ever do this in real life. Whenever the user is signing up, you create an empty user and then you add posts later on. But if you want to, in the future, if you want to do gets, we will see. That's where this posts key comes into the picture. It is never stored into the database as such. Database is still raw, basically these three fields. then these fields, and then the author ID. The author and the posts are never stored in SQL. All right. Let's do a quick recap, and then we will proceed to changing a few things. Create user.ts.js. This file right here does a prisma.user.create. So all these functions Prisma has generated for you. Where? In the Prisma client. How? From your schema.prisma file. When you ran npx prisma generate what was the command? This. When you ran npx prisma migrate dev name in it, somehow in some folder in node module, when you run this, actually it does give you a log that says client has been generated automatically. What is that client? It is this thing that I'm importing, and this client now has context of this specific database has a users table, has a post table, and that's what you're trying to. That's how you get access to this thing. Prisma.user.create, Prisma.user. Whatever, delete, or like delete many, or like select, so on and so forth. So this Prisma client has been generated when you ran this command. What is the source of truth for it? It is this file. You as the application developer just wrote this file, ran the migrate command. If you're an application developer and you want to connect to Postgres, you will just need to create this file, run the migrate command, go to your Express server and start using it. You don't have to worry about how it gets generated. You can just start using it, which is what we're doing right now. All right, let's proceed. Create user is done. Let's try to do create post.ts in the just to make sure we're on time here. I'm going to copy a few of these from the repo that I have. You can write them from scratch or you can copy them, but I already wrote a bunch of these. So I'm just going to copy these over. All right. I'm going to remove all of this. You can also go to 100x-dev/archira/week 13 Prisma and go to source/o to create posts and like copy the code from here. If you want to write it yourself, that's great as well. All right, let's look at the code. Very similar to the thing we had until now in a new file called create-post.ts, prisma.post.create. Title of the post. If you want, what was the other thing? Content of the post you can put here as well. Important thing is now author. Author connect ID 1. This is how you say this post belongs to author number 1. We already created a user. This user right here. This user does have an ID 1. So now if I run this query, it will create a post and it will know, okay, this is connected to the users table with the ID 1, with the specific user which has the ID 1. Let's try to do a tsc-b and do node this/create post.js. It ran. Hopefully it succeeded. How can I check? I can just go to the npx prisma studio and see the post table. It does have a post now, which is title of the post, content is asd. Published is false, which was the default value. If I run this again with published true, tsc-b, node/create post.ts. Now if I run npx prisma studio again, you will see 2 posts and this one is published. So this is the syntax to create a post. Only extra thing here is how do you connect it to the author, and the answer is this. Maybe I could totally be wrong here. Can I just do author ID 1? That might also just work. I do see an error here though. Oh no. Author ID 1. What's the error? Sorry. If I remove this and I do author ID 1, will it work? I think it'll just work. I didn't run it. Yeah, it just worked. So you can also do author ID 1. But so the point to get at here is that developers need very easy syntax. So this is the syntax they might understand. You can argue, Harki, that I like the author ID syntax more. I would agree with you because we know SQL, but a lot of people don't know SQL. So for them, this is how they understand. Okay, well, this is another way to create a post and connect it to a user with ID 1. All right. Yahan tak are we good? Can we proceed to gets and posts and deletes? That hopefully should be very quick. Very good. Alrighty. So one extra thing I want to introduce here before we go there is, in the end, again, there are SQL queries that are running under the hood. And if you want to see what those SQL queries look like, you can add a few things to your Prisma client. So there is a debug logs.ts file here. You don't have to worry about this. This is the part that you have to worry about, which is when you're creating the Prisma client, initializing it, add log, info and query to it. You can also add things like error. It really depends on how much logging you need. But if you add info and query, it will give you all the SQL queries in your logs. Under the hood, when you do a create or when you do a create user or even gets and posts eventually, under the hood SQL queries are only running. You don't see them. But if you want to see them, you can just replace Prisma client with, for example, if I go to create user and replace Prisma client with these logs. If I run yarn build now or whatever, sorry, tst-b, and if I go to node dist create user.js, it gives me an error because, well, this a user with this email already exists. So let me do that again with a new email. And now it gives you the insert query. Insert into public.users email name values $1, $2, which is like the syntax that we were doing yesterday as well. You have variables and then you put the values in a separate array. And then after the insert, it did also do a select. Why did the select? Because, well, you might need the data here. So let user equal to whatever, data equal to await of this. So under the hood, it has done both of these queries. You can see them if you want. And if you know a little bit of advanced SQL, what it has done is what's called a transaction, which means it sent a single query. It began a transaction. The begin syntax basically means you begin a transaction. You send it two queries there, कि भाई ये दोनों साथ में भेजना, send these together. Then you say commit, which means both of them go together. So you save some network sort of round trip, and it sent two queries basically together. Similarly, if I do create post.js, you will see all the SQL queries under the hood that you would have had to write if you were not using an ORM. So that's sort of the high level benefit of an ORM, and you can see the underlying SQL queries if you want to by adding this to your code. All right, I'm going to remove it, and we are going to proceed to, after posts, you should probably either do gets or updates. Let's see what's the format we followed here. O3 dash create user and posts. So maybe just look at this code. Let's not run it. You can, as I said, also when you're creating the user, add a bunch of posts for them, and this is the syntax to do it. So email, name, and then posts, which, what do you want to do for posts? Oh, see daisy. Create them and then the array of the posts. Again, in our use case, it makes no sense. User signs up, then they individually add posts. You don't seed their posts upfront. But let's say on the sign up page, you want to give the user the functionality to give them email, give their email, name, password, whatever, and then add posts there itself. You can, in a single query, initialize the user with a bunch of posts if you need to. Prisma provides you that. Depends on you whether or not you want to do it. In our use case, it won't work. For a to-do application, you don't need this whole thing. You only need to sign up the user independently and then eventually add posts by running the prisma.posts.create command. All right. Not running this locally, but if you run it, it will just work. All right. O4 get users. So let's get to how you can get users / posts. So src get that user / users.ts. Again, very straightforward. If I copy this over and bring it here, which I would urge you to as well, we do a const users equal to prisma.users.find many, and I send no arguments here. You can send some arguments. What are these arguments? We will see very soon. But if I want all the users in my database, this is the command I will send. And if I log this, let's see, tst-b and then node dis get users.js, it gives me a list of all the users, and then I did another query here, which is why we're seeing some things. But if I run just the query to get all the users, this is what it logs, which is user, the first user and the second user. I can conditionally ask it as well, ki haan, find many where whatever email is a specific thing, and then it will just give me a single user. I hope this where clause is straightforward. Let's look at the query below. Comment the query above. This one says find unique, which means there will be a single unique user. So this will, if you hover over it, return you look at the type of this thing. It's an object which has like posts, users, user information, ID, email, name, whatever. If you look at the thing above, it returns you an array. If I hover over it, you get an array of ID, email, name, whatever. But if you look at this, it gives you, let me just remove this include post thing. I simply say prisma.user.find unique. What does it return you? It returns you a user which has an ID, an email, and a name. The thing to learn here is, okay, the difference between find many and find unique is you get very nice types. I can simply know, I know users is an array here. So I can do users dot whatever for let I equal to 0, or like for user in users, so on and so forth. And then I'll get good types for this user. If I hover over this, I can do like console.log user dot, and it gives me whatever. I'm missing something obvious here, but the thing that I wanted to show was it gives you good types. Maybe this is not an array and I have to do something like users.row. What is it? Array, it looks right. User in this console.log user dot email type string. What am I missing here? Karde bounty for user and users. Let's see. For, let me try one more thing. If not, we'll do a bounty less than users dot length I plus plus. Let user equal to users of I, and let's see. We do get the right type, so the syntax was wrong. So here I can do whatever user dot email, and it gives me the right types for this users. Versus, how are we doing this until now? We were doing whatever pg dot. Let me go to week 3 here. Get data. How are we doing it until now? User res equal to client dot query this select query. So 1, I had to write this select query by hand. 2, this user res had no types, so it was, I would not get auto completed keys like I am here. Over here, I'm able to write whatever user dot, and it tells me there's an ID field, there's an email field. This is what's automatic type generation that Prisma gives you. The thing that we were using until now does not. That's the other benefit that you get. Hopefully this is also straightforward. Let me remove this. And now the only thing other thing that you need to know is how you can get the joined data of two things. You can get both the user's details and all of their posts in a single query. So let's see how that happens. The answer there is this include thing, which is for this user, get the normal things that you get, also include the posts. So this posts again is the sort of, this key comes from where? It comes from Prisma / schema.prisma. Here, this, as I said, is a conceptual concept. It is present in this auto-generated client. It is not present in your SQL query, your migrations, because your database does not have this posts thingy, but your conceptual client does, and it knows for this include post, so it will include all the posts for that user as well. Now if I run tsc-b, maybe let's remove this, just get the single user and their posts with their user ID, node /get users.js, and you get email, name, and more importantly, you get all the posts for the user, which is something you would have to write a very complicated join query for, or you would have to send two queries in SQL when you're trying to do it using the PG library without an ORM. All right. The unique thing here is you might think that this uses joins under the hood to make a very performant query and get joined data. That's not the case. If you add a log here, a debug log here, you will see it sends two queries, one to get the user's details and two to get all the posts. Why? That's how Prisma wrote it. I'm sure there is a way to get joined data as well in Prisma. We will not have the time to discuss that today. Neither have I looked at it before the class. But if you do add debug logs here, you will see it sends two queries, one to get data from the users table, one to get from the posts table. All right. Is getting data complete? Shall we proceed? Pretty good, 91%. What is the next thing after getting data? It is, so we've done inserts, we've done gets. Let's do updates. So 07 update user.js. Let's look at this one. You can frankly just look at the syntax and I think you will just understand it. Await prisma.user.update. Again, you get all good types here, all that jazz. Where the user's ID is 1, set the name to the new thing. If you do run this locally, let me quickly do, you will see that the user's name has been updated. update user.ts. So this is like the easiest bit here. Okay, if you just want to learn, like know what Prisma does and get on with your application, just create your schema, run the migration and start using it. And like, don't, just like you used Mongoose, right? We never understood how Mongoose is working under the hood. So if you want to, you can simply just, start working the Prisma. It's always good to know how it works under the hood, but after a point, you don't need to for a really long time know what's happening here. You just need to just use it as an ORM. Update user.js. It did run. If I run Prisma Studio, I do see that the user with ID 1 hopefully has a new name called Harkirat Singh 2. There you go. So update query also works as expected. After this, there are like various ways to do complicated queries. You can look at the Prisma docs. If you ever get stuck, okay, how do I do this very specific query? But most CRUD operations, it will like give you very nice sort of types to do it. For example, whatever, like get, what was it? Update, and then the last one that you might want to think about is delete. How do you delete data? Again, you can just use autocomplete here or look at the docs and figure out how to do deletes. Fairly straightforward. There are a few advanced things that I wanted to cover. So let me just cover those and then happy to take questions. But hopefully the like CRUD operations are straightforward and like debug logs are straightforward. How you can get debug logs. Maybe one more query to cover here is deleting very conditionally. Okay, delete all the posts of the, what do I want to say? Yeah, to delete all the posts that are unpublished. Let's say this is the query that you want to run. So what you can do is prisma.user.update. So I'm not sure if this deletes. Okay, this deletes all the posts of a specific user that have been that have not been published. So let's say in your website you want to give them a button that says delete all unpublished posts. This is the query that you can run. Prisma.user.update, where the ID is 1, data. Now here you would have either written things like, oh, whatever, email, new email, or first name, new first name. But if you want to update the post itself, you can also basically get add more and more keys here. If posts had a bunch of sort of foreign keys to something else, you can also add like whatever address here and then so on and so forth. You can keep getting more and more deeper into this and write queries like this. For example, so for example, in this case, if you want to delete all the unpublished posts by a user, this is the query to write it. Okay, where the user ID is 1, update the posts. And how do you update it? You delete many, which means delete as many as you get who have published as false. If you just add delete here, it will, I think, just delete 1. So you need to specify delete many to delete like all the unpublished posts for a user. This was maybe the last query I wanted to cover in CRUDs. And then let's go to 2 things. One is advanced debugging, which is, until now we added something, right? What did we add? Let's see. Okay, maybe before advanced debugging, let's do something else, which is filtering and sorting. So there are 2 scripts here. Let's see what they do. Let's say you want to do some, it also lets you do like a bunch of advanced SQL things or like advanced queries, which is like, let's say you want to find all the users who belong to gmail.com. So this is the query to run for that case. Let's copy it and bring it to source/advanced-query-1.ts. Let's look at it. What does it say? It says prisma.user.findMany, where email ends with gmail.com. Now again, this gets converted down into an SQL query, and let's see what that SQL query looks like. But the idea is it lets you do complicated queries like these as well. Again, SQL under the hood is what lets you do these complicated queries. SQL has something like select star from users where email like gmail.com. So under the hood, it's running a command like this, but it gives you like high level sort of functions to do it. Let's see what else it says. Okay. Get all the users whose email ends with gmail.com and has at least 1 published post. So posts some published true. If there is at least some row which has some post that the user has published and their email ends with this, you get all their posts, you get all their user information and also include their posts. This is like a very complicated query. Let's try to break this down. Let's comment this include thingy for now. Let's comment this as well. Just this, let's understand. Prisma.users.findMany, where let's say you can do where email is something, harkirat@gmail.com. You can also do where email ends with gmail.com. This one will give you all the users whose email ends with gmail.com. Let's say you want to also say that their email ends with gmail.com and they have at least some post published, which means they have at least one published post. You can do something like this, where email ends with this and posts, at least some post is there which is published. If you do this, it means whether or not they have at least one post. If you do this, it means whether or not they have at least one post that is published. Lastly, if you run just this query, let's try to see what it gives us. It gives you the queries that it's running. Let's ignore that. And it gives you the user, which is harkirat@gmail.com, which is the only user who has at least one published post and ends with gmail.com. It does not give me all my posts though. Let's say I want all the posts of this user as well. What you can do is, that's what this include thing gives you. Okay, along with their own information, include the posts as well, where let's say they're published. If you remove this, it'll give you all the posts. If you do this, it'll give you just their published posts. Let's try to run it again. And now I see the user's information as well as their published posts. These look like objects right now. You can also log them a certain way. Basically do something like json.stringify, and it'll give you the raw objects here if you need to look at the thing, but like you have access to whatever rest.posts. Look at the type. It has posts as a key, so you can do rest.posts.whatever, iterate over it and do your thing. This is a slightly more complex query that was part of their docs. If you look at their docs, there are a bunch of more advanced queries, lets you do a bunch of things. You may not need these right now, but eventually at some point, for most applications, you may not need these. If I'm being honest, you just need simple CRUD. But at some point, as your application grows, these queries are slightly more performant than doing queries or something like that, or like doing queries a certain way, but you don't have to worry about that for a really long time. CRUD you should at least understand, which means how you can create stuff, delete, remove, and update stuff. And I missed one thing here, but you get the idea. And one other thing I wanted to cover is this thing I forgot to cover yesterday, which is something SQL gives you again, but how you can do it here, which is this concept of pagination, if you've heard of it, which means if you go to a website usually and it has, let's say, too many users or whatever, it gives you page numbers. Page 1, you look at a list of users, or if you go to lead code, it gives you all the problems, and there's like buttons at the bottom, button 1, button 2, button 3, so on and so forth. You click on button 2, it gives you the next 10 problems. Click on button 3, it gives you the next 10 problems, so on and so forth. How does this happen under the hood in SQL? So in SQL, the way to do it is, whenever you're writing the query, for example, select star from users, let's say all of them, you can add something called limit. Limit 1, which means I only need one user. Limit 10, I need 10 users. And the other thing you can add is something called offset, which means I need 10 users after this offset. So when your person is on page 0 of leadcode.com, you need this query to run. Select star from questions table, offset 0, limit 1. This is because you have thousands of problems, and if you run the select query to get thousands of problems, it will be really slow. Most people are on page 0 of lead code, so you just show them 10 problems. This is the SQL query that runs for getting the first 10 problems. If you want the next 10 problems, this is the SQL query you need to run. Okay, offset 10, so leave the first 10 problems and then get the next 10 problems. And then if you need the third page, offset 20, limit 10. That's how you get more and more problems as the person paginates through your website. The question is, what is the alternate of this in Prisma? The answer is this advanced query 2. So if you look at it, there are two sort of queries that it exposes. Take, and one more thing which I forgot. Let's see, go back. Let's copy this over and bring this to our code base in another query called advanced query 2.ts. is the last thing we want to cover. Then I'll do a pause, questions, all that jazz. Take, and what is the other thing? Skip. There you go. So let's bring the query from here to here. If you are, let's say, if you want to do pagination for, let's say, a questions table, or let's say this posts table, what can you do? Prisma.posts.find many. Take 3 at a time, which means the limit, or like how many you need at a time, just 3. Skip, which means how many to skip, or the offset. So this offset is represented as skip in Prisma. This limit is represented as how many you take at a time. If I run this query, let's say I make take 2 and skip 0. I try to run node dist / advanced query 2.js. it gives me two entries, the entry with ID 1 and ID 2. Let's say the user goes to the second page. That means I need to skip the first two and then take the next two. Do this again. And if I do this, I get the one with ID 3 and ID 4. If I look at the SQL query, you can see it has limit, some variable 1, offset, some variable 2. So it is actually using these two under the hood to work, but sort of you give them like take and skip at a high level. And that's how you sort of, this gets translated to this. All right. That is more or less it. One more thing I want to cover, but let's do questions if feel like we will cover, otherwise this is fine. Is this part clear on itself? We will do, of course, some marinating after this, more question answering, but at a high level, do you understand this, or this was hard, straightforward? Oh wow, pretty good. Cool. So 96%. So maybe let's just cover one more thing then, if it's 95% already know this. Second thing I wanted to cover was, so I was able to log the queries. I never saw these variables. Okay, what is the limit and what is the offset? And this is something Prisma doesn't give you out of the box. So I Googled this, how do you do this? Because when you want to debug an SQL query eventually, when you run this in production, you will need to know the SQL query that's being run. If there's an error in Prisma or whatever, you will want to see the SQL query. You will also want to see what variables it's sending. And this much is not enough for you to get those variables. So I Googled this. I reached a specific issue on Prisma. So like sometimes, even though these are very advanced sort of libraries, they don't have a few features for some reason. So after Googling, I reached this, and this guy basically asked for the same thing. And whoever this is, the maintainer, they said, you probably don't want this because a lot of times the values that are here are secrets and you don't want them to be logged, but like offset and limit aren't secrets. Maybe something else is. So these guys, the Prisma guys, took the stance, okay, we are not going to implement this in-house, but if you want to do it, they gave like a workaround. That's the workaround I brought, where in this advanced debug/debug.ts file. So if I copy this and if I add debug.ts here, paste this. So the only extra thing here is one, how the logs are a little different, but I think the thing that actually does the thing, like logs the values and the query, is this part right here. Okay, Prisma.on, which means you can actually listen to events on Prisma. You get an event and then you log the query and the parameters. So now if I look at this, as you can see, take is 2 here. So ideally limit should be 2 in the final SQL query. If I go here, if I do tsc-b and I run dist/debug.js, you will see it gives me the SQL query. It also gives me the parameters that it is sending, which in this case is just $1 and $2, which is 2 and 0 because offset is 0 and take is 2. To make this 3, look at the SQL query, it gives me 3 and 0. So that's how, if you want to look at the variables, you can. That's the last thing I wanted to cover. This part clear, and then we will open it for questions. This is more or less all we need to know for Prisma. And then from here, you are in a decent state to look at a few projects now. The thing you have to keep in mind is, so we have done this for a very basic application, and there will be an assignment that you should definitely do so you get comfortable with the syntax. But eventually, where people get stuck is getting the context of an open source project. So dub.sh, as I told you, if you look at their GitHub, they also have, this is all their database ORM bit is. But the thing that's different for every project is what the schema actually looks like. So this is where people get a little complicated, and this is where there's a lot of developer specific logic. Some developer wants to store data a certain way, other guy wants to store it a different way. So what ends up happening is, at some point you look at this and you're like, this feels weird, and it might actually be weird because the developer who wrote this was weird. Like they thought of something a certain way. So don't feel like you're wrong when you're going through this and something feels weird. Although this feels pretty straightforward if you look at it. These are the standard metadata fields that we had, which is name, email, all that jazz. Email, whether or not the user has verified their email, and sessions. If you look at it, I think is where the session token is stored, which might be coming from like next auth, which is what they use for authentication. Account is also most probably related to authentication. So this though is definitely related to authentication because it has like access keys and refresh keys. And like provider is most probably like Google, Facebook, who is what provider the user used to log in. And scope, what scopes you asked for. If you have gone through the next auth video, this might ring a few bells. You asked for just the email scope and not, let's say YouTube access when they're trying to log into Google. And then let's see, verification token is for, they probably send you an email with a verification token and then they store it here. Project, most websites, even Vercel sort of lets you create projects, and in each project you can create multiple links, for example. So this is most probably that table, project invite, most of these websites, so Vercel, w.sh. The most SaaS websites sort of work this way. Okay, they let you create organizations or like what are called projects, and then you can invite people to that organization. So this project and this project invite is most probably for that. This is a role whether, so enums is maybe something I should have covered, which is basically sometimes role is not a string. It is a string which can either be an owner or a member, only two things. So for that you can use enums and not have strings. You could totally have strings here as well, but it gives you more strict types. If you like describe an enum upfront, this field can only be either owner or member. It cannot be some third thing. But you'd also just work with string as well. Ideally you shouldn't. All right. What else? Email type, send type. The important thing here is this link. As you can see, pretty big database, table, and that is because this is where meat of this project's logic lies. They store links. They shorten the link, they have the original link, they have the new link, you can put passwords on a link, so on and so forth. UTM sources, where did the user click on this link from? Was it YouTube? Was it Google? So on and so forth. So whether the user came from iOS, Android, what is the user's geolocation, which country they were from. Whenever someone clicks on a link, you need to store all of that. So that's probably what's stored in the link database. And again, there are no good docs here. You will just have to read through this and then see usage throughout the project. How are they using whatever, let's say Prisma client. Let's search for Prisma client here. And let's see, it has it in lib/prisma.js. It just exports Prisma. I need to see where all Prisma is imported. So this is how I would basically debug the project now that I know Prisma very well. And like database is a big part of most projects. There's just the API layer, the database layer, and then the front end. So for the back end, the most complicated thing here would have been Prisma, which hopefully is clear now. And this most probably is going to be one of the projects we look at because this is written the right way, the way you should write. And the reason for that is this guy does work at Vercel. He knows how things are written. He probably has access to the Vercel code base as well. So if you look at this website as well, it looks very similar to Vercel's. So this is a code base you should definitely understand. And this is one of the code bases that we try to understand end to end. Alrighty. With that, let's open chat and answer any questions you guys might have. Ando. Indexing, people asked. So मैं high level दे देता हूँ. I'll give a high level and then in the offline class I have to cover React this week, like a recap of React. I will cover indexes as well. Indexes क्या होते हैं? कि let's say you have a table, the posts table, right? Our post table, what does it look like? Let's go to Visual Studio Code. This is what the posts table looks like. ID, whatever. Most important thing, like some look at here is, it has an author ID field, which means doesn't mean anything, but like there is a very high probability that one popular query will be give me all the posts for this user. Do you agree or not? What will be the query on the posts table? Give me a certain post, which is fine. Second would be give me all the posts for a user. You know कि हाँ ये तो बहुत often use होगी query. This will be a very oftenly used query. What will not be an oftenly used query? Give me all the posts for a title. This is not a query that will be used more often. But this query, give me all the posts for an author, will be used very often. So what you can do is, okay, whenever there is a search happening on author ID, which means select star from posts where author ID equal to something. If you know that the where is going to happen on author ID, you can do something called putting an index there. What that does is, okay, any query that searches only on author ID becomes faster. How it becomes faster is a whole different thing. Very popular interview question, and there is a very good video by there is a good video by Abdul Bari, that he's an Indian YouTuber only, and he has a very nice video if you want to get into the depths of how this works internally and why indexing is faster. Most days you don't have to worry about it. All you have to do is like put whatever is the syntax to put an index here, which I don't know what it is in Prisma, but there is I'm sure there's an easy way to create an index. What a Postgres generally does is, whenever you have a foreign key like this, it does create an index by default. So if I go to migrations here, as you can see, there is already an index on. So there is an index on the email field on the user, which is this. Okay. So this is something Prisma did. Okay, if there's a unique key, you create an index on it. What Postgres does is, if you ever have a foreign key, it creates an index on it automatically, from what I know. So the assignment for this week was going to be creating an index and then seeing how the query is faster. And the caveat there was going to be, okay, most probably if you do add an index here explicitly, whatever the syntax to do it, you won't see any benefit in the query to get all the posts for an author. And the reason for that is, since author ID is a foreign key, Postgres automatically sort of indexes it. Right? 5 minutes. निकल रहे हो? 5 मिनट में आता हूँ, अगर निकलना नहीं आपको अर्जेंट है क्या? निकल जाओ, 5 मिनट में फ्री हूँ मैं. Alrighty. Cool. More questions? Pause. In the end of github.com, type github1s.com. It